Right, I'd like to welcome everyone to this actual meeting in person. One face that I've not actually seen before, though I've heard the voice. I believe you at the last. Yep. It's great to actually be in person. The housekeeping for a start. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. If a fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the side of this room. Presumably there. Exit through reception and meet in the War Memorial car park. The meeting is being webcast live on the internet and will be available to view on YouTube after the meeting. And please switch off your phones or turn to silent. Right, and thank you very much. So, to make a start, first of all, we have quite a few apologies for absence. Parish Councillor Fryer, Town Councillor Slimming, Ms Orchard and Ms Proctor, who are both independent standards assessors, and Councillor Mackay has been replaced by Councillor Hussey. Right. So any declarations of interest? Any urgent matters? Right. Meetings of the minutes of the meeting held on 15th of November. Has anyone got any corrections? Fair and accurate. And there was only one thing that was sort of picked up, was discussed in that meeting that we can pick up briefly this evening. That was, we discussed the need for code of conduct, revised code of conduct, e-learning, and I think you've seen the slides that were produced.
I'll be honest, I've been on holiday.
Right. They were.
Email has been playing up. So
right.
If you
Right.
send it to me again, I'd be grateful.
Yep. Great. So I suggest that we sort of pick it up briefly at the end of the meeting when we're discussing the forward plan. Yep. Right. So the complaints update report.
Thank you, Chair. It's the usual updating report on the complaints. The format has changed slightly, so I've indicated in the appendix which complaints were existing at the time of the last meeting in November, and then on the second page show you which have been received since. So in relation to those which were still ongoing at the time of the first meeting, they've both now been dealt with, and you'll see that we've had quite a number which we've received since November meeting, which amounts to 7 further complaints, all but one against parish councillors. Just as an update, the second one down 050186, that has now been dismissed at stage 2 and just waiting to hear whether there'll be an appeal. And the one underneath that, 050097, and as it's indicated, an appeal has been lodged and that's still ongoing. Thank you.
Does anyone have any comments about the complaints log? No. So moving on then to the annual report.
Sorry to just noted.
The report was noted. Yeah, sorry. Right. So moving on to the annual report. We've got a draft annual report here. Did make a couple of minor amendments to it. There were a couple of minor typos that are crept in, and also where it says complaints, obviously I haven't put the figure in, but that needs to be put in, the number of complaints for this year. And also the social media guidance, which we have discussed, that is going to...
Yeah, Chair, that's going to the council meeting this month for approval, as is the code of conduct.
Yeah.
So I can update this report depending on the outcome of that.
So any comments from anyone?
Thank you, Chair. The only thing I would mention is I don't know if it would be a standard thing to thank an ex-colleague, because you've noted that we've lost Chris Evans. Would it be worth extending our thanks in the report as well for his years of service?
Yep, definitely. Good suggestion. Yep. Right. Oh.
Could I just note at the bottom of the report the parish council representatives, I'm not sure about the format, but we're all showing as CLLRs except me.
Oh,
And borough councillors are shown as councillor, not the abbreviated form. Is that tradition, or is that just a typo?
That's just not very consistent. Sorry, apologies for that.
Right, so note that, and with the suggested amendments. Yeah, great. Right, so moving on. Item 7, review of arrangements for dealing with complaints against councillors. A hand over to Fiona to...
Thank you, Chair. Well, as you'll appreciate, this is the most substantive item on the agenda. It presents quite a fundamental review of the current complaints process to bring it in line with the LGA guidance on complaints, which was published last September. I've listed in the report what the main changes are. I mean, the tracked changes version will show you that it's quite comprehensively changed from the current version, although some of it is tweaking and amalgamating in different places. So if I just run through what I see as the main changes. So fundamentally, I've proposed reducing the current 3-stage process to a 2-stage one. So the first and second stages of the current arrangements are combined to form the new 1st stage initial assessment. So hopefully it's clearer. There are 2 clear tests which I've outlined in the arrangements. So A are the criteria in paragraph 4.5 met on page 62, i.e. can the complaint be made in the first place? Is there the jurisdiction to make the complaint? And if that is met, then should the complaint be investigated? So it's generally bearing in mind the costs involved in investigation, and the general guidance being that investigation should only proceed in the most serious matters. Most cases should be able to be resolved informally, and that's where the emphasis is now lying on the complaints process. So at the end of that initial assessment, there's 3 decisions which the monitoring officer, in consultation with the independent standards assessors and independent persons, would make, which would be either that no further action would be taken, that it would proceed to informal resolution, or it's so serious it would refer for formal investigation. So that's one of the main changes to the proposed to the current arrangements. Also in the current ones, it's not very clear in all circumstances who's making the decision. In some places it says it's the independent standards assessor, and other places it says it's the deputy monitoring officer or monitoring officer. So under the new proposals, and the guidance is clear that it ought to be a monitoring officer's decision in consultation with the independent standards assessors and independent persons. And I think practically speaking, that's probably how it is operating. The third change is regarding publication of decision notices. Currently, at this council, all decisions at stage 2 and above are published onto the website with names included in those decision notices. I've proposed that unless there's a breach found, that there should be a summary of the decision made but no identifying information contained in those. Now that's subject to views, and people will have different views about that, but I suppose I'm thinking that if there's no finding of a breach of code of conduct against you, why should reputationally your name be on the website? Now there's differing views on that, but I think in fairness it shouldn't be out there unless there's been a breach found. The other fundamental change, again, which I'm sure might have differing views in the room, is that in line with the guidance, I've proposed that there aren't any rights of appeal in the process, and if there's a complainant or councillor aggrieved, the route is through the Ombudsman and not, as it is at the moment, through myself. So in practice it means that the Deputy Monitoring Officer has to handle all complaints at the initial stage, because I have to be left free to deal with any appeals that might arise. So in practice, it also means that complaints aren't dealt with speedily because we can't share the caseload between us. Although, that might not get over the fundamental issue about whether you should have a right of appeal. The guidance is clear that there shouldn't be a right of appeal, because when it was introduced post 2011, it was supposed to be a light touch regime, and the decisions about conduct of councillors were supposed to be taken at the ballot box, and that's where the decision should be taken. But I quite understand there may be differing views, and that'd be interesting to hear here. So at the moment, there are rights of appeal from stage 2 and above, unless there's a hearing, in which case there isn't a right of appeal. It would then go to the Ombudsman. The other change is in relation to a hearing panel, which fortunately we don't get to that stage very often, or certainly haven't got to that stage whilst I've been here. But in our current guidance, that hearing panel is made up of the monitoring officer and 3 independent standards assessors. It should be councillors on that hearing panel. It should be a councillor decision and not myself and the independent standards assessors. So I'm recommending that it's a subcommittee of this committee that would actually form a hearing panel should we get to that stage. It can have parish, town council, independent elements to it, but the vote would be down to the borough councillors who are forming the panel. So those are the main changes. I know there's a lot of changes in there. I just wanted to let you know we did consult the independent persons who obviously aren't on this committee as to their views about it, and there were some very good comments back from them, which I sent out informally to committee. Councillor Hussey I didn't include you at the time as I wasn't aware you'd be here. So just to raise those quickly, the first one was in relation to paragraph 4.9, when we're looking at that second element of the test I referred to as to whether a complaint should be investigated. The third bullet point was to do with robust debate, where the complaint is by one councillor against another. A greater allowance for robust political debate may be given, bearing in mind the right to freedom of expression. One of the independent persons suggested that we should include also whether debate involves criticism of a senior officer of the council, and whether in a public forum or in social media channels that should be included as well, because more senior officers are supposed to have a thicker skin and be able to take any criticisms that come their way. The second comment we got back was in relation to paragraph 4.13 on page 63, and this is to do with the publication of the decision notice. So currently it says a summary of the outcome will be published on the council's website, setting out the conclusions on the complaint and the reasons for the conclusion. There'll be no identifying information published. The suggestion is that unless that's inserted, unless the monitoring officer forms a view that it would be disproportionate, a summary of the outcome will be published on the council's website, etc. And the monitoring officer may decide to report a complaint to Standards Committee as exempt information if it would be disproportionate to publish the outcome on the council's website. Then on paragraph 5.2 on page 64, this is to do with informal resolution, and what I've said is that if you're dealing with it by informal resolution, then that's not a determination that there's been a breach of the code of conduct. But one of the independent persons quite rightly suggested that it may be it's not a formal determination. There might be minor breaches or technical breaches where you can say there's been a breach, but it's suitable for. It doesn't have to go to a formal investigation, and it could be dealt with through informal resolution. And then in paragraph 5.3, which was the list of areas which might be appropriate for informal resolution, there was a comment on the fourth bullet point where it says where there is interpersonal conflict, that actually that's the same as the bullet point below, which talks about breakdown of relationships, so suggesting that be deleted. And again, in that bullet point below, it refers to allegations of minor disrespect, harassment or bullying. And I think that's quite right. The independent person pulled me up on that one. You really can't suggest that there's minor harassment or bullying. That's not appropriate. So she suggested that it's a negative behaviour rather than what I've already got there. And that was almost it, I think. Just on the page 69, paragraph 7.4, pre-hearing process, just in that list of issues to be determined by the hearing panel prior to any hearing, just adding any reasonable adjustments that may be required to enable full participation of witnesses at the end, just recognising some people have some special needs which would need addressing. And before you tell me, I've noticed this numbering went rather askew in paragraphs 8 and 9, so I will correct that. So those are my general comments, and I look forward to yours. Thank you.
Councillor Hussey, I believe you had your hand up.
Yes, I've got 2 points. At the end of a hearing, when somebody has been assessed as being guilty of an offence, why would we wish to not publish their name?
So if they've been found in breach of not complying with the code of conduct, that is one of the situations where you would publish the name because it's been found, it's a finding being made. I'm suggesting the ones earlier where there's no finding or there's no merit, that they're not the name's not published in those circumstances.
The other point is about the ombudsman. My understanding is that when cases are referred on any matter to the ombudsman, what they want to see is the procedure, the policy, and that the policy has been followed, not the result of applying the policy. So there's no sense of appeal with an ombudsman. That they don't cover that stage. They only make certain that the council has followed the policy. So I don't think the comment, unless I misunderstood your comment, there's no appeal. But they could go say ombudsman. All that he could say is, or she could say, is, this is the policy of Basingstoke Council. This is what I've got evidence that this was followed. End of case.
Thank you. I've had a situation where the Ombudsman has got involved following a decision not to take any further action, and they've asked for the whole complaint to be reviewed by an independent person. So they do take. I understand what you're saying, but they have got involved in other matters. Under the ethical standards review, which they did a couple of years ago, the recommendation, we haven't had it in legislation yet, is that the Ombudsman provides the appeals process in effect. But you need legislation to bring that in, which isn't forthcoming yet.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. picking up on, or on a related point to what Councillor Hassey said with regards to not publishing the names of people who haven't been found in breach of the Code of Conduct, there are definitely instances in other walks of life. I can't think of any maybe more relevant examples, so I'm going to go with the entertainment industry, but where allegations of inappropriate conduct have been levelled against public figures for decades, and then those are eventually found to be true. So by not publishing those names, you're offering a level of protection to somebody who may very well be guilty of something that just can't be proven. So my opinion would be that we should publish the names regardless, because if in a decade's time that individual has had 5 or 10 or 15 complaints levelled against them and they've managed to not be found guilty or in breach in any of those cases, that still gives voters and members of the public information about that individual and whether or not they want them representing them as a councillor. I don't know if my opinion really matters, but I thought I would voice it anyway, because I would be hesitant to protect individuals who might not need protection when the opposite isn't really a huge negative, because you won't have multiple, or in theory you shouldn't have multiple dismissed claims against you if there isn't something going on that hasn't been found with some sort of investigation. So one case that your name is published but has been dismissed shouldn't hurt your chances at the ballot box, shouldn't hurt public opinion of you to any great degree. Whereas if you have many that have been dismissed and your name does get published, then that might sway public opinion and in a reasonable way. So anyway, that was all I had to say on that.
Thank you. Is the information about the name of the person retained by the monitoring officer? So we're not publishing, but if you have a person who repeatedly is reported to the monitoring officer and from a variety of sources, then is that part of their process in the stage 1 review now? And I think there is another point that I'd like to raise, is that from the time that I've been on this committee, it's quite clear that there have been occasions where there have been vendettas against a particular person, and if you get a vendetta against a particular person, whether that be true or not, you certainly can see multiple complaints against a person. So if you get multiple complaints against a person and you then say, well, if sufficient people get together and hate this particular councillor and put in complaints, then we'll get their name published. That is giving in to the mob rule, which I don't think is right. So there's a question about our previous complaints retained by the monitoring officer and available when they are considering in the informal stages.
Yes, we keep them on record. We have files. We'll have all the files on complaints. Yes. The other issue, just if I may, which is another argument in your favour possibly, is that the press sometimes pick up on complaints against councillors and run with it, and then, at least if there's been a finding of no breach of code of conduct, if that goes into the public, then you've got the press statement and that decision as one, if you like, and that might be better for a councillor's reputation that it's out there publicly. But, that's just another issue to throw into the mix, really.
And one point I've just thought of is what happens if a councillor moves to a different constituency and then wishes to stand as a councillor. Does that information ever carry on or can be carried?
No, there's no process for transferring information to another area.
My concern is where there could be malicious intent, which is what you're referring to. and people's lives can be ruined if the name is put in the public domain. It can break up relationships, marriages, whatever. I think the example that's being referred to is where complaints have been raised and the authorities have chosen not to investigate. That's a different matter. We should investigate every claim made, whether it's malicious, whether there's evidence or not, we investigate. But until a case is proven, that person must be innocent and shouldn't be judged by the press who wants. The only news that's good news for newspapers is bad news. It's sensationalism. So we shouldn't go down that route. I believe that people should be innocent until proven otherwise. But that, just because it's, I hate to say this, but somebody well known, an ex-mayor or whatever, we want to, he'll be all right, we don't investigate. That's rubbish. We investigate everyone. That is the protection that the people who are making claims deserve, that we investigate every case. But it's behind closed doors until such time as we have a decision which says that they are guilty.
Yeah, it's really the issue of whether publicising and publishing all names actually adds to the interest of fairness for everyone, or if not, at which level. You know, should every councillor who has a complaint made against them have their name published, or should it just be people who've gone through the initial assessment, or should it be people who've just actually been found to have committed a breach of the process, of the code of conduct? It's getting the balance between openness and the extent to which openness actually helps everyone, or can openness be misinterpreted? Can you have, as you've suggested, the malicious complaints, so it looks as if Councillor X has actually had 10 complaints against them? Yeah, so Councillor Hussey?
If I follow your logic through, the person who makes the complaint should also be named.
That's a very interesting point.
That may be the guilty person.
Yeah.
It's a malicious intent.
Yeah.
So I don't like your argument at all. I couldn't support it. I believe that everybody is innocent until proven guilty. Every complaint that's received should be investigated as fully as we can. And if there's not sufficient evidence, then that person is innocent, because we can't prove them guilty. But we should save that information, because if there's another complaint at a later date, then the first one can be revisited. But throughout that period, the person who's being accused should not be named. I mean, some people who feel wronged make all kinds of allegations, or can, which are figments of their own imagination. And I wouldn't like to see my name in the press because of that. And then my grandchildren gets picked up by my grandchildren and get things in the playground at school. Because they're the innocent ones. They need to be protected too. If I'm guilty, then publish my name.
To clarify, I wasn't suggesting that everyone should be. I was more sort of trying to follow the logical process through as to who should and what interests are being served.
Well, I believe in British law. Everybody's innocent.
Yeah.
Taking my lead from law, everybody's innocent until proven guilty.
Thank you. I was wondering if, as a committee, we could request maybe some statistical analysis be done looking at the number of cases that get dismissed as vexatious at the first stage, second stage, and so on. And if we could have a report brought back at some point to us that tells us at what stage things get dismissed, that might then inform a decision as to whether or not it would be beneficial to have different options in terms of publishing names. Because I've heard what Councillor Hussey said, and I do agree with it very strongly. There is a presumption of innocence until you are found to otherwise be guilty. But having your name published as somebody who has been found innocent, it is a separate matter entirely. But all I was requesting is that regardless of whether you're found innocent or guilty, your name still be published for information more than anything. It's not an accusation because you're specifically being labelled as innocent within the bounds of the process. So, yeah, I would request that some sort of analysis be done to look at the instances of people being of complaints being dismissed at different stages of the process, and more importantly, whether we have any historical data around repeated, as people have suggested, harassment complaints. Because obviously, if there's evidence of that sort of thing happening in the past, we can use that to make a better decision now. Because if it only has happened once in the last 20 years, then is it really? It's such an edge case. Should it really dictate how we proceed on this issue today?
Yeah. If I could just very quickly before I pass over to you, I think that's a good suggestion. I think there's also this issue, not necessarily vexatious or malicious, but the angry or misinformed complainant, which also needs to be looked at. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we need to bear in mind that I think the majority of the complaints are against parish councillors. We have many more parish councillors than borough councillors, and our policy must be appropriate for parish. Within the parish, we have people who have little or no training in standards and little or no understanding of code of conducts, and we have a variety of code of conducts. So I think we need to bear in mind that what we're discussing is not just relating to the standards and publicity that relate to borough councillors, which is a more important level, but it does relate to parish councillors, where at this stage there are problems having enough people volunteering to be parish councillors. And if we make it that you lose your reputation because a couple of other people are upset by you and therefore they make complaints, then I think it must be proportionate on that. And I think there was another point you raised in terms of analysis. There's a very useful heading about lessons learned in the reports. And I feel that within if a monitoring officer is seeing a bunch of complaints about an individual councillor, then they will undoubtedly, and I know they have in the past, make consideration of that in their judgment. And I think that the ability to deal with cases at an early stage in an informal way is probably a lot more beneficial for minor errors made by parish councillors, which is the bulk of the details you deal with. So it's usually looking at people who think that their role as a councillor gives them more powers than they genuinely have. I think that's one of the cases. And actually providing education for councillors where they have transgressed against the letter of the law is far more valuable, and that will leave people continuing to give public service as councillors than it would be if you hang them out to dry and say anybody who does anything like this will be run through the press and will be they'll be taken out of their society. So I think just keep the balance in here, please.
Can just question for clarification, Fiona. Is it the case at the moment that all names are published? Yes.
Stage 1, no.
Right.
But if it gets to stage 2, they are, yes.
One thing I think needs to be borne in mind too is that a lot of the parish councillors, picking up on your point, don't receive any training at all from the council. They get presented with things like the code of conduct, but there's no actual training and things that go with it. I know it's something we're looking at, but it's something that also is a point that, unlike the borough councillors, they do get all that training.
Well, when you say all that training, there's induction following the elections in May. There's always a code of conduct training for borough councillors. So there's one session, but yes, it's obviously something we need to address with the parish councils, which we're going to hopefully do with the new code if it's adopted. Yeah.
Just one last point. Could you, for the next meeting, consult with Anne Greaves about what she would recommend in terms of legality about publishing names?
I don't think there's a legal issue. I've spoken to Anne about it, but there's not really a legal issue about it. It's what the council, what you as councillors think is appropriate. Really, in some councils they don't publish the names at all. They'll just publish what I'm suggesting is like a summary without any identifying information. So it shows the public that we've dealt with the complaint appropriately. We're just not revealing who it's about. So I can I can speak to Anne again. She might have a slightly different view than me, but I think there is a difference of views, isn't there, available on this one, really?
Yeah. There's been a case in this council a couple of years ago where there was an issue with one or more councillors. I've got to be careful what I say here. One or more councillors, and it was settled out of court. So there are occasional complaints about breach of procedure or whatever, but certainly if I was named and it was unsubstantiated, no evidence whatsoever, I would consider taking this council to court for damages.
Thank you, Chair. Having listened to what everybody's said, I'd still like the statistics, but what I wouldn't want to do is put a huge burden on you or the team around you to spend a great deal of time and effort gathering that information into a report. If the general sentiment in the room tonight, and if the recommendation from the LGA is that we make this change to no longer publish names, so I'm happy to withdraw that if it's going to be of an unreasonable burden. So.
Excellent. So I think the general mood is to be in favour of this change and not publish. Yeah, unless the councillor is found to be in breach of the code. Right, that's good discussion about it. It's great to hear a variety of views. What about the other changes? In particular, the condensing into the 2 stages and also the lack of an appeal except to the Ombudsman.
I think, as Fiona said, it's that which is in general national guidance. I think that having a 2-stage rather than a 3-stage is much more appropriate, condensing the 2 into a single stage. What I have noticed is that sometimes complaints and the investigation of them takes a very long time. And I think that that's inappropriate as a councillor, that if you are believing that you've erred, and I think in most cases with parish councillors it's zealotism or ignorance rather than doing something in a particular inappropriate way. And I think that actually to get to the point where somebody is told, look, you are under investigation for this and you've been under investigation for a year or two, is really demoralising. And I think if we're looking at parish councillors, well, actually, do I want all this rubbish? No, I'll resign. And that doesn't do the community any good. If we can get to a position where, if it's something that's a small transgression that needs some retraining, some advice, some clarification, we should get to that quickly. A two-stage with the officers first and then moving on to something for more serious occasions is perfectly right, I believe.
Thank you. I would mainly just question, is this a change that you're personally comfortable with, or is this something that you've just adopted or been encouraged to adopt from the LGA? If you have concerns as the expert, then obviously I wouldn't want to support it. And I'm not sure if it's been made clear your feelings on the matter, because adopting national guidance is all very well and good, as long as it makes sense within the context of our council. So,
I suppose I still consider myself fairly new to the council, although it's nearly 2 years now. I think one of the first things I noticed when I read through everything when I started was like, this is a very complicated complaints process compared to other places where I've worked. So it takes much longer to deal with complaints under the current complaints process than it would have done in other authorities where I've done the same work. So it is my recommendation that we streamline it. I mean, it happens to coincide with the guidance, which is rather fortunate for me. So I've done it because the guidance is there. I suppose it spurred me on to do it, but it's one of those jobs and tasks I've been meaning to get round to since when I started. I think it's overburdensome in some respects, and we could, as Councillor Slapford said, we could deal with things a lot quicker and probably more effectively rather than them hanging around for weeks and months. So yes, I endorse it.
I mean, certainly from my experience dealing with complaints in different organisations, for example at a major housing association, by the time it reached us as the panel of board members, it had taken, in some cases it's been a couple of years, and what was perhaps a small issue had all this burden of anger from a resident and also officers who might have been left in limbo for a period of time, and it wasn't healthy for anyone. And then more recently looking at complaints at Thames Valley Police, again, it's not helpful. If someone's done something wrong, need to get it resolved. If they haven't done something wrong, need to stop them hanging over them. And if they've done something slightly wrong that actually just needs a bit of training or an explanation of what they've done wrong, then get that dealt with as quickly as possible.
I see you've got a decision made in stage 1 within 15 working days. Are you going to bring a similar guideline in for time to resolve stage 2?
No. So if it gets to stage 2, then it's after I've put in paragraph 6.2. So these will be the most serious cases if it gets to a formal investigation. So I said it should take no more than 6 months, because it will be more complicated. Hopefully it won't take more than 6 months, or even up to 6 months. But sometimes if it's formally investigating and there's a number of witnesses, it can take quite a while. And the 15 working days is on the basis there aren't appeals to do, because then I can share the workload with the Deputy Monitoring Officer so we can get through the complaints quicker. If you were to want an appeals process, then I'd have to sort of look at that time limit, I think, have a review of it.
What do people feel about not having an appeals process within the council? I think you both put your hands up at the same time, so... Oh, sorry.
Oh, I think it's fine. Fiona earlier gave a good explanation that by not having the two officers being able to work through the caseload together, that it results in undue delays, all for the potential outcome of needing somebody to be impartial at an appeal. But I think we have ombudsmen. I think they're good at being impartial. They've offered detailed investigations in the past, so I'd have no issue with it. And regarding all the other issues, I'm satisfied. I've had my say, I think. So yes, I'm calling an end to this debate. Not that I can, but yeah.
Great. So unless anyone's got any other pressing comments to make, I think we've done this justice and really good lively discussion.
So just need to confirm the recommendation,
So
which
confirm the
you've done the first. It's if you're okay with any amendments I can make out of this discussion for it to go to the Constitution Working Group for them to review.
Yep. So confirm.
Sorry, there was a point raised with regard to the Ombudsman currently not being available to deal with complaints, but that the law is being changed to make the Ombudsman capable of handling complaints, if I understood correctly. What I'd hate us to get to a decision that was based on the Ombudsman being able to manage a complaint, but the law not getting changed and being left, as Councillor Hussey has said, that they can only decide on process, not on adjudication.
So we don't know yet if the law will be changed. We're waiting on the government to make those decisions. My experience is the Ombudsman has got involved when a complainant hasn't been satisfied with the outcome. Obviously, it's always at the discretion of the Ombudsman, and if I can't say that they'll definitely get involved. I presume they would review it and see whether they thought there was something lacking in the investigation or the complaint handling for them to determine that they should look at it. So it's a possible route. I can't say they would definitely get involved.
Okay, I'm happy to accept that point, but it's something that I thought was important on process, that if there isn't a formal appeal and we feel an appeal is appropriate, then it's something I don't want to postpone what we decide, but what we're deciding is you've given you've given an assurance that in your experience the Ombudsman has provided some form of appeal process already, and that the new legislation is likely to enshrine that in law, so therefore I'm happy for us to proceed as proposed.
On that note, I suggest that we refer this to the Constitution Working Group. And move on. There's only one other item really, which is the review of the work programme. So two things. Firstly, we had previously discussed the need for training, especially for parish councillors, on the new code of conduct. Some slides were circulated via email of training programme.
So yes, at the last committee it was requested that I bring a paper to this committee with some potential e-learning module. What occurred after that meeting was that the LGA made it clear they were providing a training pack to all councils on the new code. So I didn't want to preempt anything they've done. So what I circulated, and I'll make sure Councillor Agnew, you get a copy, were the training pack slides from the LGA. the comment I've had back from people is they're far too long, which is, I think there are about 80 slides in there, a fairly big writing on occasions. Alongside it is a presenter's pack which gives scenarios and questions to ask and sort of case studies to work through. So it is quite interactive. I think what I need to look at them. They only came out a week or so ago, so it wasn't in time to go out with the papers. So I need to have a review of them, see what we can cut them down to, which still provides a good training session, and then going forward look at an e-learning model if that's the way we're going to capture the parishes, or whether we can do it in some other way. There's you're going to have to think about time and capacity to do in-person training or virtual training, but we need to, in the long run, it might save us time on complaints if we can put in some good comprehensive training.
I saw the pack and I looked at it and I thought, I can't get into this. And if I'm a representative who's come to this committee from being involved in the District Association of Parish and Town Councils, so I'm an odd fish in that direction, as Councillor Agnew is. Sorry, that's probably, I'm probably not allowed to say that nowadays, but it's sort of, we are more committed to the process than the majority of councillors. And the most important thing, I think, was the front page of the revised Code of Conduct, which actually condensed it into about one paragraph. And it was basically the Nolan Principles, updated marginally. But I think that the best that we're ever going to achieve is A, to have a standardised Code of Conduct. And we must sell that to the parish and town councils. I know some have already adopted it, but if we have 75%, this committee is still going to have its problems, because we have different people working to a different set of rules. So if you have standardised training, 86 pages of slides, that is not relating to all parishes, that's not going to work. So I think there have been some very good training that has been provided by people like the LGA, people like National Association of Local Councils, should also be strongly involved in this. But it has to be something that's digestible, quick and understandable. And I think that possibly a training programme is just maybe one side of A4 of the key points that people need to bear in mind.
Yeah, very good points. I mean, I looked through the training pack and I thought there was some extremely good stuff in it, but personally I wouldn't want to sit through a training session covering all of it, all 86 slides. No. But if hopefully view it as a resource to take stuff out of. Yeah.
I think sometimes the things like scenarios are some of the best way to get people to train and realise where they can be going wrong, because it's then more applicable to what they're doing. So maybe if it's quite a short summary on the front, I'll have a look at it when I get it, and the scenarios, then that could be the better solution so that people can see.
Yeah, there were some scenarios actually at the end of the slides, which I thought actually those look really useful. And as you say, get people talking and thinking.
Just a question. Do I take it that some parish councils do not adopt the guideline standards?
No, the point is that each parish or town council decides to adopt its own code of conduct. And the code of conducts that are out there have varied. So over the years, there's not been a standard code of conduct, and it's not appropriate really. I recognise you shaking your head and I can understand that, but it's the way in which the parishes relate to the borough. The parishes are not a subset of the borough. They are an independent independently elected group of people, and they operate according to their own rules. And I think in the past, and I noticed in here that there's reports of cases where you have a different set of standards. So before you investigate, you need to investigate whether the code of conduct for that council has been broken, not whether the code of conduct for Basingstoke or the code of conduct from the LGA has been broken. And that's been something that's been around for a very long time, and until we actually sell the benefit of a standardised code of conduct to parish and town councils and find some way in which we can reward them if they do follow it, if that doesn't sound inappropriate, that there has to be a benefit to the parish or town council. And remember that some of these are really tiny groups of people operating with a budget of maybe £5,000 in a year, having meetings perhaps only quarterly. So it's a very different world to the world that you know.
Thank you for that. It's a very good summary.
Please. Do I take it as a possible scenario is that in parish A I'm found to be in breach of code of conduct, but the same conduct in parish B I would not be found guilty of break. Is that possible?
Correct.
Yes, that is correct. And yes, I share your look of amazement.
Could I ask for guidance, not now but in future? It would be my understanding that the public would expect elected officials to behave in certain ways, and that newly elected councillors should sign a declaration to say that they will after the induction. Is that a possibility that we could look into?
All councillors sign an oath of allegiance. I'm sorry, it's called something different, but they do say that they will abide by the rules of the club, of the council. I shouldn't be flippant in this, I apologise. But so therefore, you sign to say you will abide by the rules of the council, but the rules of that council on a topic may be different to Council B. And that has always been a real problem for the Standards Committee going back for donkey's years. I've only been on the Standards Committee now for about 4 years, I think, but I'm aware that this has been a standard problem that's gone back for 10 or 20 years.
So when parish councils are putting together their documents, do they cherry pick specific parts from the guidance, or how do they come to these wildly different conclusions? But forgive me if that's not an accurate description, but from what's just been said, how do they reach these different conclusions as to what would constitute a breach? And are there mechanisms that we as a borough council could, like you said, use to encourage a more standardised approach that you're aware of? Could we put a core document together that could be built upon, rather than, parish councils having to adopt the whole document or nothing at all? Right.
I'm sure Councillor Sackford will come in a minute. I think this is a point that Councillor Sackford's been making for a while now. So I've made some attempts to engage with the parishes on the new local LGA model code. So I've sent it out to all of them for comments. I did attend the BDAPTC AGM last year, I think it was, and gave a presentation. And the code I'm asking for the council to adopt in March does make reference. It is a code for both the council and parishes, and it makes clear which bits of it are just the borough bits and which are the parish bits. Most of it's the parish bits. Yeah, for both, sorry. I mean, currently there's a range of different codes, but I'm sure I'll be corrected if I'm wrong. Some have adopted the Basingstoke code. Some have, as it the NALC, the National Association of Local Councils, has also got its own code. Most of them have the same general provisions in, but just not necessarily all the same exactly. So some haven't got the Nolan principles in them. So
all the same words, but not necessarily in the same
yes,
order.
probably, maybe. But there's different provisions in about interests, I suppose, as well. That's quite a big difference sometimes. So one of the recommendations, as the borough councillors will see shortly in the report I'm preparing for the council meeting next week, is that the recommendation is, if it's approved, is for me to engage, to send it out again, tell all the parishes and town councils we've now adopted the code. Please do likewise if you haven't already. And as Councillor Safford said, some have already done it. They're ahead of us, really, but it does need consistency. It would help myself and the Deputy Monitoring Officer out as well if they were consistent, and we didn't have to keep looking. We have to look up each individual code of conduct at the moment to check what's in it. But I'm sure Councillor Safford might have other points to make.
Yeah, sorry. The generalisation of codes of conduct for parish and town councils is probably okay. There will be different details, and the details probably relate to an understanding of where the current standards are. There will be some that will go back to, we had there was a national institution which was enforced the code of conduct. I can't remember what it was called. Standards Board. They were based up in the Lake District somewhere, I believe. So that some will have got that because they were told either you abide by this one or you're breaking national law. Oh my goodness me. So therefore you write out your code of conduct based on that, which was 10, 15 years ago. Now, when you come to revising your code of conduct, as you need to, or reapprove it once a year, I believe, it's an awful lot easier just to say, well, we'll accept what we've got, rather than we'll go back and we'll redraft and look at what there was and what's now proposed and see which bits are appropriate to this parish, because councillors will want to have an involvement in their own code of conduct. What we need to really have is that the code of conduct, the base code of conduct, the Nolan principles, is really what matters. You don't abuse your role, you don't abuse your fellow councillors, and you certainly don't abuse officers. And that really is the fundamental bit of stuff, I think. And the rest of it is the detail. Now, if we've got something it certainly is a benefit to the monitoring committee if there is a standardised code of conduct, because it means that you'll be able to speed things up in terms of handling claims. But it's no good actually just saying the borough has decided this and here it is, guys, you've got to adopt it. You'll find resistance to that. It has to be that the councils want to do it because it's easier for them to have something that is current, appropriate, considered and easily adopted. And that is, I think, what we need to be aiming for. And I'm sure it is the case, but actually it's just the way it is presented. If something is presented, this is what the borough wants you to do, and you're a parish councillor, I'm sorry, there are people that are not willing to do that. But so it's just a question of selling it. So they are generally about right. Do you think, agree, Linda? You've been doing it for a lot longer than I have. Oh, sorry, Councillor Agnew. I apologise.
I was going to say I've actually been on Standards Committee for about 15 years, and I know that it's been a problem for that many years as well. One of the things that was always I found when I asked people against the Basingstoke one was that there were parts of it were just non-applicable to a parish council, things like subcommittees and various other stuff that was all in that, and there was no way of being able to say, well, that paragraph is not applicable to us, and things like that. And I think if Basingstoke comes out with that capability of being able to say, well, paragraph 5, 6 and 8 aren't applicable, then I think you'll be fine. And that can actually keep in things like the Nolan principles, which we know we all should be abiding by.
Thank you. So, forgive me if this sounds incredibly ignorant. Why can't parishes just adopt the entire document if the pieces that aren't relevant are never going to come up, such as subcommittees? If you have no subcommittees, adopt the rules for subcommittees, but you'll never need to exercise those rules because you don't have subcommittees. Every document produced by a council must have paragraphs that are just worthless bureaucratic guff, for lack of a better term, that is completely irrelevant or out of date or misleading. But as long as a situation never arises where you need to rely on that paragraph, it doesn't matter. And from what I've heard, like, maybe my imagination's not good enough, and I can't imagine a scenario where a paragraph exists that semi-applies but forces the parish council to behave in a way they wouldn't want to behave. But my point is that if there's scenarios where something will just never occur because that's not a function of the parish council or a feature of the parish council, then why not just adopt the whole document, and then the bits that do apply to parishes can just apply?
I think in some respects it's this little bit about the parishes having their own power. So if the parish feels that it can turn around and say that those 5 paragraphs do not apply to that parish, then they feel that they have actually set up their own code of conduct. At the moment, it's that independence part of it. Would you agree, Councillor Thackford?
Yeah, I think the point is that if you have a document that you're going to adopt, and as you're going through the drafting process, you say, well, that doesn't apply to us. Oh, well, we'll delete that. So therefore, that's been deleted. So the documents that we have come from a variety of sources, from the Standards Committee, from NALC, from Basingstoke, from various places at times, and councils have deleted. Now, you just don't have time to go through and do this sort of professional analysis of a document each year. So what you do is that you just say, oh, leave it as it was. Now, if you have a council that has grown, we've got several councils which have grown significantly with new houses in their area, and they may now employ officers, whereas when they had their code of conduct, they didn't. Now, if they've deleted it because it doesn't apply to us, we don't have any officers, any employed staff, therefore the bit about not being rude to employed staff doesn't apply, so I've deleted it. Now I'm carrying this forward. I just reviewed it and said, yes, I'll accept that. So now this document is inappropriate and out of date because of the changes in circumstances. We've also seen some changes in the law, small amounts, which actually make things a lot clearer. And you need to get that involved in the adopted code of conduct for each of our 45 different parish and town councils. So that's the point. So I think really we need, when we first looked at this document, there were bits I said, well, actually, can we put that in brackets? Because it doesn't apply to hardly any parish councils. It might apply to town councils, because town councils are nearer to the borough. But if you've got a document that's got bits in it that you don't think are appropriate, first thing you're going to do is delete it. And as soon as we've done that, you've got the variation that we've lived with for 15 years.
The difficulty there is you're not future-proofing. Should things change, somebody's got to remember, that's not in our code of conduct. We need to change it quickly.
The answer on that one is that we have to, by law, adopt our code of conduct, our financial regulations each year. Now that is a huge job, and one that mostly people say adopt the whole lot with the way we've got it. We haven't got time to look at it. carry on. So it doesn't future-proof it, but the future-proofing in the legislation is you need to review each year. If you've got a standardised one that is appropriate and is being reviewed and updated by this committee, then that is the benefit to parish and town councils.
So, to summarise, I don't think we're going to solve the issue of divergent codes of conduct across the parishes at this meeting. However, we are hopefully making progress and hopefully the Borough Council is making it easier for parishes and town councils, while also not giving them the impression that they're being forced to adopt. And the training material, I think those of us who looked at it think there's good stuff in it, but not the whole thing for parish councils. Yeah. Right, have we finished discussing that? It's a really good discussion. I think the only other thing on the review of work programme, this will actually be my last meeting chairing, because hand over to Camilla Proctor, who's the one of the other ISAs, and she'll be chairing from July. But it'd be good if we could sort of think about and come up with items that we feel would be useful to discuss on our future work programme. So really, July, I mean, we could certainly bring back where we are with the Code of Conduct training by that point. Does anyone else have any other burning issues that they think should be on the work programme for July, or indeed going forward?
Sorry, can I just, one point that needs clarifying. Fiona's pointed out that the District Association appoints their representatives in June for a year, and then those people are not ratified till the following May, and therefore we've got a mismatch. We just need to define that the appointments from the District Association are from the municipal year following, and just get that piece tidied up, I think.
Right. And if nobody else has anything else on the review of the work programme, move on to exclude the press and public, and if there are any confidential or exempt items for information.
I now have a question.
Yep.
Now.
Right. I therefore close the meeting.